We had given John and Ashton time to get geared up and ready, and into the woods we went. We quickly made it to the water, and Henry went on and told us where he had sat and reminisced about the memories he and his boys had shared there. We couldn't stay long, of course. Whatever it was that howled didn't seem too far away from our house. "Have you guys ever thought about setting up camp here and staying overnight?" Henry asked. My boys and I did that often. We would lay out under the stars, roast marshmallows, and just talk. I think I miss those moments most of all. I don't know if I would feel comfortable setting up camp and staying out here all night, especially after our run-in with the Bigfoot and the rock escapade recently. Not to mention large, snarling, oversized dogmen. From the look on everyone's face, they shared my opinion. "You are braver than I am," John said. "No way you would catch me out here in the overnight hours." Henry laughed at that. I had a suspicion that he had experienced many things in his life, most of which wouldn't go over very well with any of us. In his time, I'm sure things were significantly different. We took Henry around everywhere that we had been. He showed us exactly where he and his sons were at when they had their encounter. I don't know what I would have done had I been in his position. I probably would have left the deer and hightailed it out of there, but I wasn't in his shoes, so I couldn't speak on that. I wouldn't be opposed to doing something like that. However, I don't think my wife would be too keen on the idea. What we experienced the other night was terrifying, that I'll admit, but it would give us more insight on their habits at night, Ashton spoke up. Connie looked at him like he had 5 heads. "You gotta be kidding me. You would stay out here?" I couldn't disagree with what he said. But from what I'd heard on the encounters I had listened to, most researchers came up with nothing if they went out with the intent to find something. Generally, the encounters happened to unsuspecting individuals who only had planned to go out camping and stargazing. Some just driving down the road. Not by someone setting up a base camp and really trying to get to the heart of what's going on. Even if I wanted to, not that I do, mind you. But you guys know good and well Marie would never let me stay out here either. I would almost have to be like a teenager and sneak out after she went to sleep, John snickered. Connie shot a sharp glance my way. "Don't even think about it," she said sternly. Just then, another howl rang out through the trees. We were all frozen where we stood. Henry let out a loud, melodic whistle. The noises around us fell silent. We all stood there waiting for something to explode from the trees, but of course, nothing did. Henry smiled at us and winked. I knew that didn't mean anything in reality, but if that's what he wanted to believe, that's fine. I'm not going to be the one to burst his bubble. We walked along looking at everything. Henry took us on a different route, however. We had never been this way, and I was kicking myself for not knowing that this land is also a part of mine and Connie's property. It was unlike any other portion that we had been through. I looked at John, and he just returned a shrug of his shoulders, indicating that he didn't know either. I was more determined than ever now, just looking at the expansive woods in front of us. Maybe the land closest to our house was only the outskirts of where both of these cryptids actually live. "So, if you go along here," Henry said as he pointed straight ahead, "there's another creek bed. It's a lot shallower than the first one by y'all's place, but it's nice just the same. Probably about a month after we saw this thing, I came walking back here and found me a footprint. I didn't have anyone to share it with back then. Only my boys would believe me. Everybody else just said I was living up to my quirky nature and dismiss it before I even finished the sentence. But this was a weird one. This one was shaped like a dog. I even said wolf back then, mainly because of the sheer size of it. I also found a huge wolf print, Henry, Ashton said. But this wasn't a regular-sized wolf, though. Henry cackled and slapped his knee. You're right about that, boy. This isn't a wolf at all. This was from one of those hellhounds. I just didn't know that at the time. I'd only seen that one Bigfoot. I started thinking to myself that we needed to buy at least another dozen cameras, if not more, to put all the way out here. There are so many ways they can travel to and from here, and we don't even know how many there are. If I remember correctly what John told me, Bigfoot have family units, and based on dogs and wolves themselves, these dogmen should also be the same and travel in packs. We all stopped and took a break once we reached the creek Henry was telling us about. How far back exactly does our property go, Henry? I never knew it came back this far. If this truly is ours, we got more for our money than I thought, I said as I sat down on a large rock by the water. Ashton walked over and sat down. I have a confession to make. I knew all this was back here. This is pretty much where your land stops. Just a little further past the creek, that is. I just wanted to get our family away from here, so I only set the price for what we paid for the house just to get out from under it. Henry laughed. That's why you got such a good price, boy. I did the same thing. Except you got an even better deal than old Mark did. Yeah, we borrowed more than the price of the house because we wanted to do restorations and stuff, Ashton went on. I didn't know at the time that I was buying the zoo from hell and that none of the restorations would get done before we had to move on. We sat listening to all the sounds around us and the water run across the rocks. This area really wouldn't be too bad for camping. It was cleared out with enough room for a tent and then space left over for a campfire. It would be peaceful just to hang out here. I left more determined than ever to make our whole property safe and usable. Suddenly, all the noises stopped. The only thing that could be heard were the breaths that each of us took and the water in the creek. Laser focused, we all looked around to see if there was any type of movement. Low chuffs were coming from somewhere in the woods, indicating that something knew that we were there. We were all standing now. John, myself, and Connie drew our weapons. That could be coming from either one of these creatures, Henry whispered. Be ready. Cautiously, we turned and started walking back, but we weren't alone. Something was pacing us just inside the woods. We all heard it. Henry broke the silence with another whistle. I cut my eyes at him. My adrenaline was pumping through my veins and my patience was wearing thin. I couldn't handle this half-cocked idea that a simple whistle would bring us protection and we could all skip merrily out of the forest. Henry lowered his head, sensing my irritation. I almost felt bad, but before I had a chance to, the growls come, one from beside us and one from directly behind us. We quickly picked up our pace, being sure not to run. That would be the worst thing that we could do. I didn't realize just how far we had come in. Getting back out was taking longer than it should have. Then my worst fear crept in. We're lost. I don't think this is the right way, guys, I said. It didn't take us this long to get to the creek. We all stopped and looked around. Henry walked a little way ahead of us. We walked the same way that we came in. We should be fine to go on ahead. It's a straight shot out of here. I was hot and tired. I was mostly tired of dealing with the bullshit going on and just wanted things to be normal. I was losing my cool and I felt it. But this was different. Yes, I was all the aforementioned things. However, the anger I felt building inside of me wasn't normal. I'd never felt this way before. Hey guys, wait up, I said. I know we don't have time to talk about this, but it's important. Do any of you feel angry or confused or maybe a little disoriented? They all looked at me strangely. Maybe this was all me and it was just the heat getting to me. Connie, do you remember the first time we came to the water and I felt something strange when I pulled my gun? I asked you about it once we got back to the house. Connie thought for a minute. Yes, I do. You said you felt like that if you shot your gun, you would regret it. Okay, same way this time. But I'm so angry I could bend steel with my bare hands, and I don't know why. John walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. You could be picking up the energy from these dogmen. Maybe you're sensitive to them. It would prove to be useful, though. If that were true, we could tell when they were around. I felt as silly as Henry with his supposed whistling. What a dynamic duo we would be in the woods. This is all preposterous. Henry the Whistler and me the Hulk. So you guys really don't feel anything at all? They all shook their heads no. I was afraid of that. The only thing to do now is to keep going in hopes that they would leave us alone. We hadn't heard them growl anymore, so I could only assume that we were moving out of what they claimed as their territory. Henry turned out to be right after all. Not long afterwards, we reached the first creek and the clearing where I had shot the wretched beast. That of which still needed an answer. Do these things really come from another dimension? Do they hold certain powers to be able to restore themselves? Or do they bury their dead and the one that I shot was laid to rest somewhere away from here? None of these answers would be a surprise to me at this point. We have to do something, Connie said. We can come out here 100 times, but the results are always the same. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Nothing will be accomplished at this rate. Henry, you said let's chase them out of here, and that's what I intend on doing. I know that you say that we ourselves can't get rid of them, but I'm tired of spinning my wheels here. Henry walked over to where Connie stood. I agree with you, little lady. Spinning our wheels won't help you and your friends and your family. I told you that only Bigfoot can get rid of them, and that's partly true. But I don't think that's the only way. In fact, I know that's not the only way. We all looked at Henry in confusion. Does he know secrets that he hasn't told us? Clearly, he knew more than he was letting on. And it was high time that we got to the bottom of this. Winter would be coming soon, and this is not something we can afford to be dealing with then. Connie and I would have to be able to hunt for meat and sustain ourselves for the colder months. We did have some animals, but I would sure love some deer meat to go along with those. So cut to the chase, Henry. I know we just met you, but you know there's more that you're not telling us. We need to know what's really going on here. All of it, I said sternly. I felt myself getting angrier than ever. Out of nowhere, my blood started boiling. Then a growl came from the distance. Why is this happening to me every time the Dogmen get close? It hadn't happened at all until Henry was around. I didn't feel this when I shot that one or in the cornfield. All I felt was fear, but now everyone could see it. Henry looked at me and then at the ground. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening, and it was time to find out the truth of why. After we made it back to our house, we all sat around the kitchen table eyeing Henry. I had calmed down, and I was ready to learn what was going on here. After my boys and I had that run-in with the Bigfoot, I set out to learn everything I could about them. I went into the library and checked out every book I could get my hands on. I read countless books, it seemed. I wasn't ever into the internet. Books have always been my go-to. Anyway, I met a man who noticed my pattern at the library, and eventually he came up and asked me about it. He said that he had witnessed one himself and went on to tell me about his encounter. That's when I learned about the Dogman as well. He said that if you have Bigfoot on your property, then no doubt you also have Dogman. They go hand in hand, Henry said. John shifted in his chair. Yeah, I read the same thing when I was doing my research. And I heard a lot about it listening to those encounter shows. It's like they live together or something. Exactly, Henry went on. He told me that there was a way to keep them all away, but it would be a little risky. At that point, I was willing to do anything. I wanted to protect my wife, and I wanted to have time back with my boys in the woods. Armed with that knowledge, I went into the woods and did what the man said. It was something I grew to regret, however. I could only assume that what Henry did was probably an act of evil unbeknownst to him at the time. This was turning into a real-life nightmare. A blood sacrifice was necessary. I did what I had to do. A fire, blood, and a couple of incantations. I wanted my family to be safe, but that man lied to me. I found that print that I told you about shortly after I did all those things. It turned out the man that I'd met didn't live far from here. He was obviously having more problems than we were. That awful deed had been done, though. I was stuck. The ritual was actually to call them in. He knew that if he could convince me to do that, it would take them off of his property and put them here in these woods. Connie gasped. Is there some way that you can take it back, though, like a reversal ceremony or something? I'm not saying I want that on our property because it's pure evil, but is it a possibility to do so these things go away? Before he had a chance to answer Connie, I interjected with a question of my own. A question that I desperately needed an answer to. Why do I get so angry when these things are around, Henry? It didn't happen in the past when John and I had our run-ins, or even when I shot one in the face, which is something else I need to ask you about. But the little time that you've been around us in these woods, I got so angry when they're around. That is a part of it, boy, don't you see? He said, visibly agitated. As part of the whole incantation, I threw that bit in there. Whoever was around me at the time in the woods would have plenty of warning if they came around. I knew I wouldn't be around anyone but my boys, and I wanted to make sure that they were protected just in case. I was trying to plan ahead. Once that was done, though, as I said, it brought them here instead of protecting us from them. That dirty bastard made it impossible for us to stay. It became more dangerous over time. It changed our whole way of life. My boys went away to college, and I knew that my wife and I would have to leave. I sold this place dirt cheap. I thought that at the time, whatever was here would stay in the woods because I wasn't there to bring them out. That's why they can't break the wood line, John exclaimed loudly. Henry, you're the key to this whole thing. It was all starting to make sense. Well, as much sense as it could make. They couldn't leave the wood line because Henry wasn't there. That one did that I shot, because it was obviously something more sinister that a spell could not contain. That still left the question with Bigfoot. Are the Bigfoot still controlling these beasts somehow? Because that night Connie and I were on the back deck and that Dogman reached our property. The Bigfoot yelled, and it retreated back into the woods. But why me? Why nobody else in the group? I asked. I would think that whoever was around you would feel the anger that the Dogman put off. Henry stood up and started pacing. Honest to goodness, Bud, I don't have the slightest idea. I can only assume that it's because you're the man of the house. You, in a sense, own the property, and that makes you own everything, not just the land. When y'all moved here, you took on the role that my boys and I were supposed to have. I had made that incantation foolproof for my sons. At the time, I was planning for their future here. We hadn't planned on moving, and once my wife and I had passed on, this would be theirs. You took that place, which means you don't feel any of the anger unless I'm around. They are my heirs, so it would have passed on naturally to them. But with you, I have to be here. Ashton had been quiet during all of this. I felt bad for him, but I was glad that it was me dealing with this and not him. He was young. I'd probably a good 20 years on him. There was no way that he and his family would have been able to handle all of this. It was a lot for me to deal with as well, but I think I have a firmer grip on it than he would. His goal would be to protect his family. My goal is Connie and myself. That's enough. I don't know how I would react with my wife plus 2 small children. He made the right choice by selling. So how do we break this, Henry? How can we make this go away? Connie asked. Henry sat back down and put his head in his hands. There's only one way, and it's not something I thought I would ever have to do. It's something I didn't want to have to do. Because of this dishonest man, the only way to break the sacrifice I made is with a sacrifice in return. What does that mean, a sacrifice in return? A sacrifice of what? John asked, concerned. The sacrifice to break this is me, Henry said with tears in his eyes. To put everything back the way that it was, it needs to be me to sacrifice myself. I never thought that it would come down to this. It wasn't supposed to. I made that blood oath on false pretenses. The way this was supposed to go is I would pass this on to my sons, the protection, not the curse. I didn't know that it was all based on a lie until it was too late. I'm glad that we all moved away from this place. Now they don't have to carry this. They're not ever coming back here, so this won't affect them. It's affecting me though, Henry, I yelled. Now I have to carry this. We have to deal with this on what is now our land. You can leave here anytime you want, but we still have to deal with these Dogmen and Bigfoot whether you're here or not. And what's the deal with these Bigfoot? Why are they here? Well, as you already know, they were here first. I'm sure they were here even before we bought the house. When we encountered what I know to be Dogman, that's when the Bigfoot whistled and called them off. I believe maybe the Dogmen were trickling in, but they were able to hold them at bay. That is, until I did what I did. Ashton spoke up. He had been taking in all this information and processing it the best way that he knew how. There has to be another way, though, Henry. If you made a sacrifice on false pretenses, couldn't you undo it in another way, not in the traditional sense? Ashton asked. Henry was silent. We all were. How is this even reality? I had taken a lot. Bigfoot throwing boulders at our heads, Dogman trying to eat us, not being able to enjoy our property. The list was long and it seemed to grow every day. Now you throw in a kooky old man who supposedly did an incantation in the woods. It all sounds too fantastical to be real. But the fact of the matter is, this is happening. This isn't a dream. We are all part of it now. Let's do some research on this before we do anything crass, John said. We have more options than just books at our disposal now. There are a lot of people who are experiencing this, and it wasn't brought to them by some ritual done in the woods. I promise you, Henry, you may have been the one to bring them here, but you didn't infest the world with them. There has to be something out there that we can find, maybe even the ritual that you did and how to reverse it. Henry looked up at us and smiled with his crooked smile. I knew it came from a good place. I also knew that he was in a rough spot and carrying more than I think I could handle. Imagine having the weight of protecting your family, strangers, and everything out here on your shoulders. I think I too would be a little off my rocker at that point. But now we have the full story of what's happening. Now came the hard part of putting everything back together the way that it was, however that is. Connie and I had offered for Henry to stay the night. He went on to tell us that his wife had passed away some years before, and that he had not talked to either of his sons in quite a while. They graduated college and have lives of their own, and don't want any part of what they left behind. That also included Henry. It made me wonder if maybe he had told them what he had done. Even though it had been for their protection, maybe they just wanted to be completely separated from that. I can't say that I blame them. I did hate it for Henry, though. To go through everything he had gone through and to end up completely alone had to be the worst part of it for him, I'm sure. I couldn't say that even if we figured out how to break this spell or whatever he had done and send the Dogman away, would repair whatever had been broken between he and his sons. But at least it would lessen the weight that he had been carrying for all these years. Later that night, Connie and I were laying in bed talking about everything. At one point, we even broke out into laughter, not believing that everything we had been going through and everything that we had heard could be true. We knew it was tough, and in our living room lay a lonely, broken man who had no one left but us. John called me the next morning. He had done some research on our property and was eager to tell us about it. Okay, so get this, John began excitedly. The property attached to yours used to be owned by Otis P. Welding. That was the man that conned Henry. According to these documents, he would be in his 70s now. I was certainly excited about that because that means he might still be alive. Maybe he can help us with Henry and what happened all those years ago. Does it say where he's at, John? Is he still alive? I could hear him pecking on his keyboard. Yeah, says he's at some retirement home. The land went up for auction once his kids moved him to where he is now. But no one was interested in it, so the county took it over. It doesn't list much about his land, but I think we all know why nobody wanted it. It was probably wrapped in so much lore and evil that no one with half a brain would take that on. So that's probably why his kids auctioned it off. Are you up for a road trip, John? I asked with a smile on my face. He's going to be our best option. We can bring Henry too. It took quite a bit of convincing for Henry to finally agree to go with John and I to see Otis. I knew that he was still carrying anger and malice for him, but I assured Henry that John and I would be there the whole time, and that Otis may hold the answer of how to get us out of the situation without him having to sacrifice himself in the process. We loaded up, and we were off to Shady Lake's retirement home. It was about an hour's drive from our place, so we had plenty of time to talk on the way. Henry told us that he didn't know too much about Otis. They weren't really friends per se. Acquaintances would be the best word for it. I can't say that I would want to be friends with someone who completely screwed me over either. At best, maybe pleasantries exchanged when in public. That's it. I saw Otis's kids shortly before my wife and I moved. They were always nice to me. I often wondered if they knew what happened. Since they grew up there, they had to have known that the Dogmen were there as well. He probably told them that he got rid of them. I guess in a sense he did, but he did that lying to me and making me take the burden to carry instead. I started wondering if coming here was a good idea after all. What if he sees Otis and charges him? That would be a headache and a half that would get us nowhere in this vicious cycle that we were in. Now, Henry, when we get there, you need to behave yourself. I know this man has done a lot of wrongdoing and he's caused you a lot of pain in your life. But to help you, we need to see if he can tell us how to reverse this without you having to sacrifice your own life. He remained quiet, but I knew that he understood. I stared out the window and wondered how Henry's life would have been had he not did what he did. He and his wife, living out their moments together on earth, knowing that their sons were taken care of, peaceful and happy. I could understand why there would be so much angst. Now Henry was alone, but it didn't have to be that way. We pulled up at the Shady Lakes retirement home about 20 minutes later. I once again reiterated to him that he needed to tuck all those feelings away, at least for the time being. If he wanted revenge, then get the revenge by reversing the curse. He nodded in agreement, and we went in. Yes, we're here to see Otis P. Welding, I said to the lady at the front desk. She met eyes with me. Not many visitors for him these days. I'm glad that he finally has some company. He's in his room, 111. That's just down the hallway here and to the right. I thanked her and we started walking. I didn't know which was worse, being in Henry's position or shoved in this box to live out your final days forgotten about. In a sense, they're both living the same ending. They were both alone. The only difference is that Otis isn't covered by a blood curse, so that made Henry's case a little worse. We walked down the sterile hallway. They had many different events taped to the walls for the residents to participate in, to bring at least some joy to their lives, but it was still an empty feeling all the same. We turned the corner and found Otis's room, just where the lady had said. When we walked in, we found who we could only presume to be Otis, sitting in a wheelchair facing the window with his back to us. I cleared my throat to gain his attention without startling him. "Mr. Welding?" Otis slowly turned from the window to face us. He met eyes with Henry and a scowl covered his face. "You filthy bastard! You ruined my life," Henry said.